Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to do something a little different because honestly the news cycle has been pretty scary. If you notice that things are feeling a little more tense, whether you're watching the evening news or just scrolling around on your phone, then you're not alone. This week, our headlines have basically been screaming instability. We've seen international incidents that could drag us into a bigger conflict, yet another instance of political violence, and new health threats making the rounds just in time for fall. But as always, my goal here isn't to freak anybody out. Instead, I want to help you make sense of these stories, see the bigger picture, and most importantly, give you practical steps that you can take to stay ahead if things go sideways. First up, we have a major escalation in the war in Ukraine. On the night of September 9th, Russian military drones violated Polish airspace multiple times while Russia was launching another massive drone and missile barrage against Ukraine. According to Polish authorities, these weren't just close calls near the border. Some of these drones made it hundreds of kilometers inside of Poland before they were eventually brought down. There were at least 19 separate drone incursions over the course of 7 hours, with drone wreckage landing in rural villages and even damaging the roof of a house. No injuries were reported, thank goodness, but you can imagine the level of anxiety that this caused for folks living in that area. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, Poland isn't just some random neighboring country. It's a full-fledged NATO member. When Russian military hardware even accidentally starts falling out of the sky on NATO soil, that sets off alarm bells. NATO fighter jets, including Dutch F-35s, were scrambled, and for the first time in this war, alliance forces engaged and shot down Russian assets directly over Allied territory. That's a line that nobody really wanted to cross. Officially, Russia and its ally Belarus claimed that the drones just lost their way due to jamming and weren't intended to target Poland, but if you read between the lines and if you look at the pattern of provocations over the last year, this looks a lot more like a test of NATO's resolve than just an honest mistake. Polish officials have called a deliberate act of aggression. NATO called an emergency meeting under Article 4, which is what they do when a member state feels threatened. Now, just to be clear, we're not at Article 5 yet. That's the big mutual defense clause that basically says you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, but the response has been quick, coordinated, and very public. Poland temporarily closed airports in its eastern regions, fighter jets are on high alert, and NATO's message to Moscow was crystal clear. We're watching and we're ready to respond if you continue to dork around. So, what's the bigger risk here? The obvious concern is that all it takes is one miscalculation, a drone that crashes into a busy city center, a civilian casualty, or a hot-headed response from either side, and then suddenly NATO could find itself pulled directly into a shooting war with Russia. Not fun, and that wouldn't just be a problem for Europe. That's the kind of scenario that could ripple out and hit Americans right here at home, whether it's through energy prices, cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, or something a whole lot worse. And even if things don't escalate into open conflict, the effects are already being felt. You've got air travel routes in Eastern Europe being rerouted, energy markets on edge, and NATO countries reassessing their own air defense postures. So, for those of us watching from the sidelines, it's a reminder that global events can go from background noise to front page crisis literally overnight. So, what does all this mean for us? First, we can't let ourselves get caught off guard by global events. Even if you're not planning on flying to Eastern Europe anytime soon, disruptions in one part of the world can have real consequences here at home. If you've been putting off building up your food, fuel, or cash reserves, now's the time to get on that. Supply chain hiccups, price spikes, or even just panic buying on basic goods could become a reality if things get worse. Second, keep an eye on what's going on around you. If you see new travel advisories or government warnings, especially related to airspace or cyber threats, take them seriously. And finally, make sure that you have a plan for staying in touch with family and friends in case that there's any sort of disruption, whether it's from a geopolitical crisis or something more local. Bottom line is that we're living in a world where even overseas conflicts can end up affecting us pretty darn quick. If you don't need to panic, but you do need to stay informed and have a plan. That's the difference between being totally blindsided and being prepared. Next up, we have something a lot closer to home. Most of you probably saw the news about Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist who was killed while speaking at an event in Utah. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics or graphic details, but what I want to talk about is how this isn't just about one person person or one event. It's part of a much bigger problem that's been building up for a while. Political violence is something that used to feel relatively rare in the United States. Sure, you'd hear about protests or maybe a scuffle at a rally, but actual targeted violence against public figures was something that you read about in history books, not something that you expected to see on your news feed regularly. But this latest incident is just one of a series of attacks and threats that we've seen over the past couple of years, and it's not limited to one side or the other. People from all walks of life are facing a level of hostility that would have seemed unthinkable even like 10 or 15 years ago, and it's not just high-profile folks either. You've got everyday people being harassed or threatened just because of who they support, what they post online, or which sign that they put in their front yard. So what's driving all this? Honestly, it comes down to a few things. First, we've got a level of tribalism in this country that's off the charts. People are picking teams, digging in and viewing anyone who even slightly disagrees with them as a mortal enemy. Add that to a steady supply of negative news, social media algorithms that stick people into boxes, and a widespread loss of faith in the institutions that are supposed to hold our society together, and you've got a recipe for a much more divided and more dangerous environment. And if you look at the numbers, it's pretty unsettling. Surveys are showing that more Americans now think that political violence is at least somewhat justified than they ever have before. And trust in our major institutions, things like the government, media, and even the courts, is near an all-time low. And when people feel like nobody's listening and nothing's working, it doesn't take much for some folks to convince themselves that extreme measures are the only way to be heard. Now, I'm not saying that we're on the edge of a civil war or anything like that, but I do think that we're at a point where the warning signs are pretty hard to ignore. When targeted attacks on public figures and political violence starts to feel normal, that's a symptom of a society in decline. It's a sign that the things that hold us together, things like shared values, basic respect, faith in our systems, are starting to unravel. So what can we do about it? First off, be careful where you get your information. Social media is designed to suck you in and not let you go, and making you angry, getting you worked up, and keeping you in an echo chamber are all very effective ways to do just that. So take a step back, check multiple sources, and don't let yourself get swept up in every little controversy that trends every 15 minutes. Second, if you go to public events, whether it's a rally, town hall, or even just a big gathering, have good situational awareness. Know where the exits are, have a plan for how you'll communicate with your family if something happens, and also avoid getting drawn into arguments with strangers who are really there just looking for trouble. And finally, don't let yourself become part of the problem. It's very easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment, especially when it feels like the world's just going crazy, but most folks, regardless of their politics, are just trying to live their lives and take care of their families. If we want things to get better, then that starts with building real connections in our own communities and refusing to let tribalism turn those folks into our enemies. I have family members that I disagree strongly with on certain things, but we stay close because we don't focus on our differences. We spend a lot more time doing things we both enjoy and talking about things that we can agree on. Unfortunately, though, the world probably isn't going to calm down anytime soon, but we can decide not to feed the chaos. That's what being prepared really means. Not just having the right gear or food put back, but by being the kind of person who can stay steady when the rest of the world is totally losing its mess. Next, let's talk about something that hasn't got as much attention, but could end up impacting everyday folks in some pretty real ways, and that's the situation between the United States and Venezuela. In a nutshell, tensions between the US and Venezuela have increased dramatically in the past couple of weeks. There's been military activity in the region, an increase in US naval presence, and some strong words flying back and forth between the two. Venezuela, for their part, is mobilizing troops and trying to drum up support from allies like Russia, China, and Iran. Now, why does all that matter for us? First, Venezuela sits on some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Any serious drama over there can send global oil prices through the stinking roof. We saw that years ago when Venezuela's economy first started to tank and exports dried up. And we're already in a time where fuel prices seem to jump up for any and every reason. So if things get hotter down there, it could mean another round of price spikes at the pump. Also more expensive groceries and higher prices for anything that has to be shipped or delivered. And it's not just about oil either. When you have this kind of instability in a country that borders the Caribbean and sits right at the gateway to Central and South America, there can be other effects as well. One of the big ones is migration. If conflict breaks out or their economy totally poops the bed, we could see a new wave of people trying to make their way north, putting extra pressure on our southern border and all the systems connected to it. That can lead to more political arguments here at home, more strain on public resources, and a whole lot more uncertainty for folks just trying to live their lives. Also, don't forget about the cyber realm. When things get tense between countries these days, it's usually not tanks and fighter jets. A lot of the times, it's hackers and disinformation campaigns. Venezuela has a history of partnering with countries that aren't exactly friendly to us, and if they want to lash out, they could very easily go after infrastructure, businesses, or just try to stir up mess online. So what should we take away from all this? First, it's a good reminder that even regional conflicts, things that seem like they're far away on the map, can have real impacts on our wallets and our daily lives. If you've been putting off filling up your tank, you might want to stay a little more topped off than usual, just in case there's price spikes or supplies get tight for a few days. If you use heating oil or propane, same deal. It's better to go ahead and pick up some extra bottles than end up scrambling if the market goes sideways. Second, think about your broader supply chain. A lot of what we buy, especially anything with plastic, rubber, or even certain foods, all rely on oil in some way, even if it's just for shipping. So it might not be a bad idea to grab a few extra basics the next time that you're at the store, especially if it's something that you use all the time. And third, when it comes to the cyber side of things, double check your own digital security. Make sure that your passwords are strong, your important files are all backed up, and that you've got a plan in case your bank or one of your utilities experiences an outage, even if it's only for a few hours. Those kinds of disruptions usually get resolved fairly quickly, but they can still catch people off guard. The truth is, most international standoffs don't turn into shooting matches, but they can still cause a lot of headaches for regular people like us. Being prepared isn't just about getting ready for the alpacalypse, it's about smoothing out the bumps when the world throws us another curveball. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot more going on in the world besides the war in Ukraine and tensions between the US and Venezuela. Over the past week, we've seen political upheaval and unrest in Nepal, France, and even Japan. First, let's start with Nepal. Now, most folks in the US probably can't even find Nepal on a map, but what's happening there is worth paying attention to. The country just went through its worst civil unrest in many years, and it was sparked by, believe it or not, a government ban on social media. Instead of quieting things down, that ban ended up pouring gasoline on a dang fire. Huge crowds, mostly young people, took to the streets protesting corruption, unemployment, and a lack of opportunity. Things got ugly pretty fast too. Buildings were burned, there were dozens of deaths, and hundreds were injured, and by the end of it, Nepal's prime minister ended up resigning. The military stepped in to restore order, and now the country's stuck trying to figure out what in the world comes next. Then in France, just as the new prime minister took office, a massive protest movement called Block Everything sprang up. What a welcome basket. People barricaded roads, set fires, and squared off with riot police, and while it wasn't as huge as the Yellow Vest protests from a few years back, it still brought big parts of the country to a standstill. Most of it was organized online, with folks coordinating through encrypted apps and social media, and the core issues were pretty much the same things that we're seeing everywhere else. Rising costs of living, the government doing stuff that people don't like, and just a general sense that nobody at the top is listening. And finally, let's look at Japan, which is a little weird since it tends to be stable for the most part, but even they haven't been immune to what's going on globally. In the past week, they've gone through their second change of prime minister in less than a year, something that's almost unheard of over there. And the reason for that is that the public's tired of economic problems, rising prices, and what they see as politicians who can't get jack squat done. When you see a place like Japan, usually the poster child for rock steady, start to wobble like that, then you know it's not just a fluke. So why am I talking about all this? It's because even though these stories are happening on the other side of the planet, they're driven by the same kinds of pressures that are building up here. Things like frustration with the government, high inflation, social media fueling drama, and people feeling like they're not being heard. It's kind of like a pressure cooker. Eventually, if enough people get fed up, then the dang lid's just gonna blow through the ceiling. Am I saying that the exact same thing is going to happen here? Not necessarily, but I do think it's worth asking, how prepared are we for this kind of instability? Could a sudden protest movement or a government shakeup hit here? I'd argue that based on what we're seeing around the world, it's not as far-fetched as it used to be. So what's the lesson for us? First, understand that stability is never guaranteed anywhere. Governments change, protests happen, and things can go from calm to psycho in a hurry. That's why I always say it's important to be ready for temporary disruptions. Have some basic supplies put back, keep some cash on hand, and make sure that you're not dependent on just one way of doing things. If there's a transportation strike, a protest that shuts down roads, or even like an internet blackout, you want to be able to ride it out without too much trouble. Second, pay attention to what's really fueling these kinds of events. It's not just politics. It's about people struggling to get by, losing trust, and feeling ignored. The best thing that you can do is to build real connections with the people around you. Get to know your neighbors, keep an eye out for folks who may need a hand, and don't be afraid to talk about what's actually going on. A strong community is a great defense against all sorts of instability, and the bottom line is that the world's unsettled right now. And while we can't control what happens in different areas, we can take steps to make sure that if things ever do get a little weird where we are, then we're ready to get through that. And finally, let's end with something a little different but still worth keeping an eye on, and that's the West Nile virus. This year, West Nile is making headlines because we're seeing more cases than usual, especially in certain parts of the country. As of early September, human cases of West Nile are about 40% higher than what we'd expect for this time of year. The hardest hit areas right now are in the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain regions, with Colorado leading the pack by a little bit. So what's causing the spike? Experts are pointing to a mix of warmer, wetter weather, which creates perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes. But it's not just that there are more mosquitoes. The problem is that a bigger percentage of those nasty little buggers are carrying the virus. In some parts of Colorado, for example, the infection rate in trapped mosquitoes is 4 times higher than what's considered normal for late summer. Now, just to put things into perspective, we're not anywhere near the worst outbreaks that we've ever seen. Back in 2003, there were almost 10,000 reported cases in a single year, but if the numbers keep trending the way that they are, 2025 could still end up being one of the higher years on record. So, what can you do about it? Honestly, most of the advice is just basic common sense. Use a good mosquito repellent when you're outside, especially around dawn and dusk. Wear long sleeves and pants if you're in an area where mosquitoes tend to be frequently, and also do a quick sweep around your yard to dump out any standing water, since that's where mosquitoes like to breed. And it's also a good idea to keep up with your local health department. If they're doing mosquito control spraying or putting out alerts, pay attention to that. And if you start feeling sick with symptoms like fever, body aches, or anything more serious, especially things like neck stiffness or confusion, don't just try to tough it out. Severe West Nile can get pretty serious, so get checked out if you need to. Now, thankfully, West Nile is a seasonal hazard. Most people who catch it will have mild symptoms or none at all, but for a small percentage, it can turn dangerous. And like most things in preparedness, a little prevention goes a long way. And before we go, tell me which one of these situations concerns you. Do that by dropping a comment down below. That'll help me come up with content that'll be more useful for you. Now, if you're somebody that's new to preparedness, then be sure to check out this list of the most important preps and survival gear that you should have. Or if you want to see a list of common household items that would survive an EMP, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.